Hey, welcome back to Tokusatsu 101, your crash course on rubber-suited men fighting rubber-suited monsters. When it comes to Toei's major contributions to Toku, Kamen Rider and Super Sentai are largely what get all the focus. They've been going strong for half a century, and they'll probably keep going for long past that. But there's one other big franchise of theirs that doesn't get as much attention nowadays: Metal Heroes. There are a couple of factors to that. One is that the series is pretty much dead. There hasn't been a true new entry in over 20 years, and Toei really doesn't seem that interested in reminding people that it exists. The other is that for a while it had largely been untouched by fan subgroups, so even if you did know about the series and wanted to watch it, unless you spoke Japanese, you were kinda screwed. But that changed fairly recently, as we now have every mainline Metal Heroes show completely subbed. I say mainline because there are two shows that are technically Metal Heroes that aren't subbed, but I'll talk about those in a bit. Combine that with the fact that we hit the 40th anniversary of the franchise a couple of years ago, I think it's high time we give this somewhat, but not really anymore, forgotten series a spotlight. Yeah, I kinda already went over Metal Heroes in the first video of this series, but that was really just a quick overview since I wasn't super familiar with it at that point, and it really does deserve more attention. So let's take a dive into Metal Heroes, see what it's all about, and how you might want to get into it. Metal Heroes started in 1982 with Space Sheriff Gavon, and like Kamen Rider and Sentai, aired a new show every year until the late 90s. When exactly it ended is kind of complicated. Technically, the final Metal Heroes show was Tetsuan Tantei Robotac, which aired from March of 1998 to January of 1999. However, this show, and the one that preceded it, Be Robo Kabutak, are kind of outliers in the franchise. See, Metal Heroes largely aired in a time when Kamen Rider was off the air. There was a bit of overlap in the late 80s with Kamen Rider Black and Black RX airing alongside Jiraiya and Gavon, but mostly Metal Heroes filled Rider's slot, and that included its slightly older audience compared to the younger crowd Sentai was targeting. But Robotac and Kabutak are very heavily aimed towards kids, so they feel very different and are often blamed for killing Metal Heroes outright. So a lot of the time they're not really counted as Metal Heroes, and even Toei's flip-flopped on whether or not they count. More commonly, Beeffighter Kabuto is counted as the last Metal Heroes series, given it's more in line with the rest of the franchise. 2013's Superhero Taisen Z movie did this, but like I said, Toei flip-flops back and forth, and the Metal Heroes 40th Anniversary CD box that came out in 2022 counted Robotac and Kabutak again. So yeah, it's weird. Personally, I'd count Beeffighter Kabuto as the last one because Kabutak and Robotac are so different, but even then they probably should at least be considered adjacent since characters from Beeffighter and Beeffighter Kabuto appear in Kabutak. So, now that we've spent all that effort just talking about where the hell this series ended, you might be wondering what exactly Metal Heroes are actually like. Thankfully, that bit is pretty self-explanatory. The franchise gets its name from the fact that the heroes usually wear metallic suits or are even just straight-up robots. There's exceptions, but yeah, it really is that simple. Oftentimes, the heroes are also law enforcement of some variety, like the three space sheriffs, though again, that isn't always the case. For a while, it was focused on solo heroes who maybe had a sidekick, sort of like how Kamen Rider operated at the time, but later shows would switch to a team format, bringing it a bit closer to Sentai in that regard. Tonally, since it targeted a slightly older crowd, Metal Heroes usually skewed a bit darker and more complex, though usually there would still be plenty of moments of levity. Some shows are darker than others. Metalder, in particular, has a reputation for being very melancholic, though I haven't actually seen that one yet, so I can't confirm or deny. But we're not going into Garo territory here. Unless I really manage to overlook something, you won't see the kind of dark or unsavory stuff that franchise gets into here. Metal Heroes can also get pretty strange a lot of the time. Yes, Toku in general can be really weird, but Metal Heroes in particular, I've noticed, has a tendency to go completely insane. You got dolls with laser eyes, which I've mentioned before, a clan of evil science ninjas trying to reawaken dormant ninja cells in people, which look like shurikens, and pretty much anything that happens in Shider, honestly. If you're looking for batshit crazy, this franchise is a great place to find it. So there's your basic overview of what to expect with Metal Heroes, targeted a little older so the themes can be a bit more serious, usually there's some kind of law enforcement, though not always, and complete insanity. Now's the fun part, where I get to suggest shows to check out if this sounds like it'd be up your alley. Contrary to what I said back in the general guide for getting into Toku, these shows are not always standalone, with some of them being direct sequels to previous ones. That said, I still think they can be mostly enjoyed on their own, but just know that some do follow up on other shows. I'm always going to suggest Space Sheriff Gavon as a springboard since that's the one I saw first, plus it's literally the beginning of the franchise. Aside from that though, it's just great fun. Gavon follows the titular Space Sheriff as he combats the Maku organization and operates incognito on Earth as Retsu Ichijoji. It's your pretty standard Monster of the Week format, as was common with Toku at the time, but if you're into that, this is a pretty damn fun watch with some great action and the man, the myth, the legend, Kenji Oba playing the lead role. If you're not familiar with Kenji Oba, then just know that the dude is a legend with a bunch of great roles under his belt, both in and out of suit in regards to Tokusatsu, and he kills it in pretty much everything. Gavon's a really wild ride that never stops being insane, and it's worth at least giving it a try, even if you don't normally like episodic shows. And if you like Gavon, then the other two Space Sheriff shows, Charavan and Shider, are also worth checking out. Admittedly, my Metal Heroes experience is still pretty limited, so the only other recommendation I can give in detail is for Tokusatsu Robo Janperson. This is one of the later entries in the franchise, airing from January of 1993 to January of 1994, and follows the titular robot, Janperson. Janperson is not a human who transforms into something, he is a full-on robot, 100% mechanical. He deals with threats from 3 separate organizations, Neo Guild, the Super Science Network, and Tatewaki Concern, who all send out their own kinds of monsters. Neo Guild is usually robots, the Super Science Network is generally various genetically modified people or organisms and whatnot, and Tatewaki Concern, being a company, usually sends out hired mercenaries. So, Janperson has a pretty varied pool of villains that makes the Monster of the Week formula a little less repetitive if that bothers you. If it does bother you though, it's definitely worth mentioning that Janperson takes a bit to really establish anything. The first handful of episodes almost feel like they were from later in the show, with Janperson established and already doing stuff, and it's not until a bit after that that they give you supporting characters and explain Janperson's origin, and I could definitely see that putting some people off. But if you stick with it, you'll find some more insane stuff. This show is where the Ninja Cells thing I mentioned earlier comes from. A cool sidekick named Gun Gibson, who despite being so cool, routinely gets his ass beat, and a truly amazing final villain in Ryuzaburo Tatewaki, aka Bill Goldie, played by Kamen Rider Zekros himself, Shun Sagata, hamming it up all over the place, and he's amazing. There's a lot to like about Janperson. I probably need to cover it on its own in some capacity in the future, but for now I'd say it's definitely worth checking out if you want to get into Metal Heroes. There are plenty more Metal Heroes shows beyond those obviously, but it's harder to suggest them since I haven't seen them yet. But Chojinki Metalder is worth it based on all the praise I've heard, and Juko B-Fighter might appeal to you if you caught Big Bad Beetleborgs back in the day. So there you go, hopefully that gave you some insight into Toei's less remembered franchise, and got you into checking it out. Like I've said, I still really need to dive into more Metal Heroes myself, but what I have seen has been a great watch, and it's a shame it's been overshadowed for as long as it has been. But hopefully that'll be changing. That's gonna do it for this video. If you enjoyed, consider giving it a like, it really helps me out, and think about subscribing if you want to stick around for future videos. I'm active on Twitter, mostly talking about stuff I'm playing, or watching, or reading, or whatever. That's linked in the description if you want to follow me there, and I've got a Patreon if you want to support me directly, but if you're not in a position to do so, or if you just don't want to, that is perfectly fine. Watching the video and sharing it around is more than enough. And if there's something you want me to cover in Toku 101 in the future, then leave a suggestion and I will see what I can do. That's all for now. Have a good day, and I will see you guys next time.